Hey guys, it's Mrs. Wallace. Hope everyone is hanging in there, doing A-OK. Just want to give you a little bit of the last part of Monopoly here. Yes, this is the last part of Monopoly. We are about to look at price discrimination. So join me for a couple minutes and we'll learn about the ways in which different businesses try to gain maximum total revenue in a lot of cases by price discriminating, which is fairly common in a lot of industries nowadays, and much easier to do because of online shopping and things like that. Okay, so, yesterday we did look at ways in which sometimes government gets involved in dealing with monopolies, and this maybe sets us up for just a reminder from yesterday, as well as some things that we'll talk about in the future. There's a great deal of ways in which the government starts to police monopolies. In some cases, we might actually have antitrust laws. We'll spend a little bit of time with that. We also might see a great deal of regulation, a lot of times that has to do with monopolies that are kind of needed by society, oftentimes by definition natural monopolies. And in some cases too, there might be a monopoly and we kind of ignore it. And sometimes some firms have monopoly power briefly, they might maintain it for a while, and there might even be litigation about that. But it might take some time for the monopoly to be addressed. So this whole topic about the role of government in monopoly ends up being pretty important. The way we'll look at kind of an additional topic of price discrimination generally isn't necessarily part of policy options. It's usually more something that the business is going to do in an effort to try to gain every bit of revenue that they can. And, the basic idea is that not all consumers have the same elasticity, for a product. So if some people are very price sensitive, then maybe we don't raise the price for that group so much. And if we have a second group that maybe is less price sensitive, maybe we can increase the price for that group. So, we are used to this with, child's prices versus adult prices, or, coach versus, higher, priced seating on airplanes and things like that. So, price discrimination is fairly common from as a tool that businesses use. Sometimes, it also can be something that is a policy option. For example, yesterday with the bridge, one of the things that could have been a potential way of dealing with some of you who suggested a subsidy. For some of you who were saying, wait a minute, we could subsidize and reduce marginal costs by doing a per unit subsidy, but that might lead to a great deal of money spent. The taxpayer has to pay for that subsidy. Sometimes what we do is we use price discrimination to kind of find the consumers that are most maybe at risk of not having the goods. So those 10,000 people, for example, who couldn't cross the bridge because they couldn't afford the $9, that could be a group that essentially, could be targeted when the rest of the group could perhaps pay the $9. So, oftentimes price discrimination becomes a part of policy options as well. And just kind of, have an idea of what we mean when we talk about policy options, talk about the role of the government. So on to price discrimination. Our goal here is to really define the different types of price discrimination, and it's important to know that, kind of like Burns, price discrimination comes in different ways, right? First, second, and third degree price discrimination. So not all price discrimination is necessarily the same. Regardless of type of price discrimination, generally the idea is that the same products are being sold to different buyers, at different prices. If it's not different buyers, different quantities, but usually price discrimination is based on different buyers receiving the exact same product. Airline tickets, movie theaters, everything that involves a coupon. Coupons are basically, messaging to a retail establishment that you are price sensitive. Football games, student versus parent tickets. We know that college and the financial aid FAFSA form is largely an effort for the college to distribute funds, which leads to a great deal of price discrimination. Lots of people, of course, don't pay the same ticket price for a college that they attend. That's essentially price discrimination. The FAFSA form is really all about kind of assessing what you are willing to pay. So lots and lots of different kinds of price discrimination. In order for price discrimination to occur, okay, firms need to have a few characteristics. So first of all, firms need to be able to uh, charge the consumer what they're willing to pay. So, we kind of need to have some ability to know what consumers are willing to pay, or at least be able to segregate the market. If you have no understanding of the consumer market that you're about to serve, there's really no ability to price discriminate, right? If there's some way of knowing this group can pay, this group can't pay, or maybe there's 4 different pricing groups, that's a possibility. We see this oftentimes when charities send out their forms. They might say, how about this donation? How about this donation? They know different people with different means are going to be able to, support different things. Price discrimination kind of works the same way. You have to know who's purchasing the product, and generally those with inelastic demand are more likely to pay a higher price. Okay, so the inelastic demand curve, the demand curve that's much steeper, is going to see much higher of a price because they're less sensitive to changes in price, right? That quantity effect is not as great with inelastic demand. So some general rules of thumb is like how we can categorize people. In order to kind of figure out who has elastic or who has inelastic demand. If you have price discrimination, the firm must have essentially pricing power. They have to be a price maker. They have to essentially have monopoly power. They have to be able to segregate the market. And we also assume in the price discrimination model that consumers are not reselling the good. Okay, of the different types of price discrimination, we'll look primarily at third degree and also first degree. So interestingly, we're looking at third degree first. Just kind of go with me on that. But it's the kind that we're most used to from the consumer perspective, okay? This is kind of a graph that depicts, imagine that you were buying software. Say it's like Microsoft Office or something like that. There might be a business price. There might also be a student price. Let's assume that the businesses are less likely to be sensitive to the higher price, okay, or changes in price. So we would say the demand curve for the smaller businesses is basically more inelastic, okay? Whereas if you notice the demand curve for students is much more elastic, students are going to be much more sensitive to the price, okay? This might be a firm that actually splits its consumer market into 2 different categories, using one graph for half of the group and the other graph for the other half of the group. And anything with third degree graphical analysis is always going to involve ways in which we have different characteristics that actually distribute the consumers themselves into different segregated groups. It might be 10 groups, it might be 6 groups, child and parent prices. It could be a variety of different groupings, but once we know some of the group is small business, some of the group is students, the small business is going to have a higher price. Why will they have a higher price? Because they have inelastic demand. Okay, so the monopoly will price at Q and they will charge this price all the way up on that very steep demand curve, and the price will be here. Okay, the firm will end up earning total revenue of quantity times price. So the goal of having the highest price, of course, if they did that high price for everybody, they might lose some of their student consumers. So they branch those people off and kind of identify. If you're a student, you don't have to pay this price. You can actually pay this price. And at that lower price, we don't lose our consumers, right? They actually stick around. So I'm not just getting this revenue. I'm also adding to it, that's the profit, but I'm not just getting this revenue. Okay, that green is your profit. I'm adding this to it also. And if you had 6 different groups of consumers, you'd be taking the economic profit from group A and adding it to economic profit from group B, then going to C and D and whichever. So the more little groups you can make, and the more you can kind of figure out each group's willingness to pay based on a set of characteristics, then you've got yourself a pretty good model. You're not losing consumers when you go to lower the price, and you're not lowering the price for everyone. That's kind of the harm with the monopoly, right? So you don't lower the price for everyone, only the people that can't afford to pay more. The type of price discrimination that the AP exam is most interested in is called perfect price discrimination, otherwise known as first degree price discrimination. This is, again, sometimes called perfect price discrimination. It's a little bit of like a theoretical model, right? The idea here is that if you could actually read every single consumer's mind and know their willingness to pay and then charge them that price, that's the model for perfect price discrimination. Okay, so just to give you an idea here, this is what we looked at in the past, where we had this idea of the demand curve, the price time and the quantity demanded. This is like our demand data. And before, we looked at a situation where we assumed that the monopolist was going to have a demand curve that kind of looks like this, and then they would have an MR curve that was less than demand. When we look at the perfect price discrimination model, we kind of notice that even though the price is decreasing and the quantity demanded is increasing, what we expect from a demand curve, we are not going to see the marginal revenue be less than demand, okay? In other words, this idea that the marginal revenue is going to be less than demand, let me just move that over, is not going to be the case, okay? The marginal revenue is going to be the same as demand. Why is that? Because you charge the first person $10. You charge, if you sell two, you still charge the first person $10 and the second person $9. If you sell three of the good, you charge the first person 10, then 9, then 8. So you don't have to lower the price for everyone. So you're not getting that price effect that we talked about. So you're getting additional quantity at a lower price, but you're keeping the higher price for the first and the second consumers. Okay, so the way that you would graph this is that your MR is always going to be equal to demand, and that becomes a game changer for monopoly. Let's look at the graph. The key takeaway here is that when price discriminating, and this means perfect price discriminating or first degree discrimination, MR is going to equal demand. So here's our typical monopoly, non-price discriminating, MR is less than demand, monopoly price is here, offers quantity where MR equals MC, price is here, and this is your profit. You guys are getting really good at this now, noting kind of a profit-making monopoly that's not perfectly price discriminating. And we know that because this MR is less than demand, we're always going to have deadweight loss, and we're always going to have a quantity that's going to be less than the socially optimal quantity because MR is less than demand. In the model for perfect price discrimination, the first thing that you're going to do is draw that demand curve. Then you're going to note that demand equals the marginal revenue curve. There is no marginal revenue curve here, right? Marginal revenue is equal to demand. Then you have your marginal cost curve, and it's going to look a lot like a regular supply and demand graph. Put your ATC there so you know if it's a profit or a loss, okay? And now what you're going to do is you're going to price where MR equals MC, okay, that's going to be that spot right there in the middle of the graph. The quantity that'll be produced is there. So notice, is this the allocatively efficient quantity? Yes, it is. It is allocatively efficient. So in a perfect price discriminating monopoly, where a monopoly knows the price that we're willing to spend, we actually have allocative efficiency, okay? Is this a monopoly that's earning a profit? Yes, it is, because if the price, and remember, there is no price here. You can't put a price here, right? It's perfectly price discriminating. So price is all over the place, right? So we're not going to label price, okay? However, we do know that if we include all of those prices on the y-axis, and I know this is my costs, okay? This is my costs. If I wanted to find out my total revenue is going to be this quantity, okay, times all these prices, right? That's my total revenue, the green, okay? The total costs would be here, okay? And then my profit is going to be this box right here, the red, okay? So if you look at the situation for a perfect price discriminating monopoly, first of all, there's an allocatively efficient quantity and no dead weight loss. Okay, none at all, because it's allocatively efficient. We don't have any consumer surplus. Okay, nobody's getting a good deal. Everybody's paying the price that they're willing to spend. And we have very large profits. Okay, of course, that depends on ATC. Okay, this is kind of a cleaner version of what I was noticing before. This is price discrimination results, several prices, so you never label price on a perfectly priced discrimination, more profit, no CS, and a higher socially, it is socially optimal. There is no dead weight loss, okay? So it's higher quantity, which is at the socially optimal quantity, okay? So that's the idea behind perfect price discrimination. There is also second degree price discrimination, in case you're wondering what that's all about. Second degree price discrimination is when we have different quantities. So it's oftentimes a result of bulk buying. You might get a reduction in price because you're buying 60,000 toilet papers, in which case you might spend less. We buy paper in bulk at BCA. So we get a discount on it because we buy so much of it, right? If somebody's buying one of something, they're not getting that same discount. That's second degree price discrimination. Not something that we spend a lot of time graphing. Okie doke. I hope that that's interesting, and we'll do some free response questions.